There is no doubt that Keir Starmer's personal popularity has taken a huge hit. For a newly elected Prime Minister, it is pretty much unprecedented in modern times, that speed of decline.
So what's the big idea? What is the big idea he actually has, but he's not telling us? Or isn't there one?
There isn't one.
There isn't one.
There isn't one. There is no clear shape to Starmerism. It's why he can't actually, in any term, medium term, short term that I can envisage, get rid of Rachel Reeves, because what are you replacing her with? What's the new policy?
The image of Rachel Reeves either being ousted or voluntarily going would be precisely the wrong thing for UK markets at the moment.
What do the markets make of Nigel Farage's souffle-like rise in the opinion polls? Hello and welcome to the Political Forecast. It has been another turbulent week for the UK economy and politics. So how much of a mess are we all in? And can Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves really turn it around? The Prime Minister says it'll take 10 years to solve some of the chronic issues facing the UK. But will he even get a second term with Labour support sliding in the polls and Nigel Farage's Reform UK breathing down his neck? To discuss all this and more, and joined by the Financial Times' columnist and fellow podcaster Katie Martin, psephologist Luke Trill, and our political editor Gary Gibbon. Gary, let's start with you. Don't look so surprised. How big is this hole that they're in?
It's much bigger than you'd expect for a government coming in with this majority, a young government. I'm talking to speed dating all the new Labour MPs at some pace, and amongst them, they've got slimmer majorities than past Labour generations of MPs, quite a few of these people. And there's real unease. And they bring up...
Are they surprised by how miserable things are, the new ones?
Yes. They're quite young. Their average age, I think, is 42. But a lot of them in their 30s, but they've been around politics a long time. They know how it works. And they're quite right. This is a really odd debut. The introduction to government is not working well.
Luke, you've had a poll out, I think, today. Miserable numbers, right? Miserable. Just tell us about those numbers. Give us the raw data and explain to us why people are saying these things.
Miserable and sort of totally bizarre, actually, for British politics. Our poll, which was out today, had three parties all within 1 point of each other.
And they are?
We had the Conservatives on 25% of the vote, so basically what they got in the general election, not really moved. Labour on 24% of the vote, so significantly, about 10 points down from the general election, and Reform UK also on 24% of the vote, up nearly 10 points from their general election performance. And this is pretty consistent across the polls now. That decline for Labour, that rise for Reform, and the Conservatives struggling to build much beyond what they got last July.
And Katie, given the fact that these polls are so miserable, and looking at the economic landscape, are you surprised?
I am surprised. And what we, at the FT, we're very focused on the business community. And what they're telling us is that they're not terribly inspired by this start from the Labour government. They would like to hear more kind of shovel-ready projects. And they would like to hear maybe, the AI stuff is fine. So the government has said it wants to make a big push into artificial intelligence, use it across public services. And that's fine, but it still feels quite conceptual. And I think what actually would inspire businesses more is something around, being able to get employees from overseas, from being able to have builders that are ready to get to work on projects. So it's a bit of a scrappy start, I would say, from the Labour government. I wouldn't say we're picking up, panic or, blood in the streets, but it is a bit of a shock because when they were the opposition, they did such a good job of getting the city on side and getting business on side. And so for that sort of reason, it feels like a bit of a disappointment.
Is the main problem there national insurance, employers' national insurance, or is it just a lack of a message to business about what they think growth actually means?
It's the latter. And, what we hear is that the government is preparing to put forward some sort of more forceful message around growth, rather than being about the doom and gloom of look at this mess that we've got to fix, about being much more positive. And I think that would go down well.
In the polling, is it specifically about the economy? Is it about the fact that they don't like Sir Keir Starmer? What's going on if you dig down to the numbers?
It's a range of things. There is no doubt that Keir Starmer's personal popularity has taken a huge hit. In fact, his net approval rating is down from +11 just after the election to minus 39 today.
How does that compare to Rishi Sunak
It is for a newly elected Prime Minister, it is pretty much unprecedented in modern times, that speed of decline. But it is to do with the economy, and it's just to do with a sense of people are a bit disappointed. They felt they were voting for change at the election, and yet what they've heard, to build on your point, the public have heard that doom and gloom too, and they're saying, gosh, is it really going to be more of tough choices? We've had that for the past 14 years. What comes now? And I think they've struggled to tell the story of what comes after, and instead been defined by things like winter fuel allowance, which, if I can pick one policy which has just been toxic for the ratings, it was that.
Gary, when you see Sir Keir Starmer speak, and you asked him a few poignant questions yesterday, he never looks as if he's having much fun. I mean, is he having any fun at all? And do they look into the mirror and think, my God, we've screwed up here? Or don't they?
I think there are some levels on which Keir Starmer regrets decisions he's made. I mean, he hugely regretted the Sue Gray one. He was almost out on his own when he made that appointment. But I must say, talking to some people at the top of the Labour Party, they're all sort of rather overly dumping on his first chief of staff. I mean, there clearly wasn't a perfect plan for government. But the idea that you would franchise that out completely to one individual while you focused on campaigning is for the birds. Of course, you should have kept an eye on that yourself. And if he had been doing that, Keir Starmer would have noticed this wasn't an oven-ready package. Remember when Gordon Brown comes in as Chancellor, the Blair government, 97, and they walk into the Treasury and they say, actually, we want to make the Bank of England independent. Apparently, the Treasury on the other side of the table said, that'll be a 6-month review, very interesting idea. He said, no, it won't. He pushed a piece of paper across and said, this is how we're going to do it. We've worked it out. Nothing like that, you feel.
And why is that? Because the one question I keep getting from people is that they have had 14 years to think about bold ideas. I know there's been a change of regime, Miliband, Corbyn, Starmer, but, the Labour Party's been in opposition for long enough to come up with some, oven, shovel-ready, bold stuff to put in on day one.
I think part of it goes back to the way they decided to fight the election. Morgan McSweeney, the campaign chief, felt that fighting a mandate election, a space to govern election, as it's called in the jargon, just wouldn't work. He'd seen it happen with Nick Timothy, who devised such a campaign in 2017 for Theresa May, being very open with the electorate about the cost of social care. He said he'd seen it in other countries, I think, and he thought it didn't work. So he shrank the size of the target on Keir Starmer's back, so forswore all sorts of taxes, forswore anything really that might lose them votes, and you end up with a second chief of staff, Morgan McSweeney, who has to govern after an election that didn't create much space for it.
But I think there's another thing, which is I think that they thought that this was going to be 2010 in reverse when they got elected, that they could say, we're going to do unpopular stuff, but it's all the last lot's fault, and it wouldn't matter. And the flaw there, of course, is that works when people go, well, I don't like the last lot, so I'll give you a bit of time, even though I don't really like it. Of course, now we've got this third party in Reform UK, so people are going, I don't like the Tories. Labour has taken away my granny's winter fuel, so I'm going to give that Nigel Farage chap a try. That's what we're seeing happening, and that was the miscalculation, I think.
And of course, last year we heard that incumbency was the shallow grave of any number of parties, governments around, the world, and they've now become the incumbent party. Right.
Well, absolutely. If there was one rule that held across elections in the last year, the biggest year of elections, I think in democratic history, it was that if you were an incumbent, you lost vote share. Even people like Modi, that people thought was sort of impenetrable, in India lost vote share. And of course, Labour have taken that on, and they've taken on board that huge sense of impatience amongst the public who just don't think the country's working.
We'll get on to growth in a minute, Katie, but it struck me as rather ridiculous that people were asking whether Rachel Reeves, one, should go to China or not, or whether she should actually stay in office or be kicked out. I mean, it would be absolutely cataclysmic, I think, for Keir Starmer to get rid of her now. But is it at all fair to turn her into a lightning rod for some of the government's problems?
I think broadly speaking, no. There is an issue in the UK government bond market, right? So we have bond prices falling, which means that the yields are picking up, which means that your mortgage and mine gets more expensive. And so, this is an issue.
Why is that? Explain to us why that is.
Well, that's the thing. There's a lot of people who are very quick to point the finger at Rachel Reeves and point the finger at the budget in October and say, this is all your fault. That's frankly a bit silly. So there is a big move going on across global bond markets led by the US, because it turns out inflation is really sticky, and it turns out the US economy is really healthy, and the US interest rates really don't need to fall as much as we previously thought. So bond prices are sinking globally, and that sort of sucks the UK into its orbit. So much as people are sort of very keen to drum up a story that there's some sort of problem with UK policy and there's some sort of problem with Rachel Reeves, really we're just dancing to a global tune here.
But how much of this are these problems germane to the island? The plummeting pound, which has arguably fallen more than even the euro. I know the dollar's very strong. Borrowing costs at an all-time at a 25-year high. Is that our problem, or is that a global problem as well?
A little bit of it is our problem in the sense that, yes, sterling has fallen a little bit more than the euro, and UK government bonds have fallen a little bit harder than, say, German government bonds. But it's a pretty marginal difference, to be honest. And the problem, I was writing about this the other day, and I was describing the UK as the ugliest horse in the glue factory, right? And that's what's going on. All government bonds are falling.
The glue factory, right. That's a wonderful image. That's going to stick with me for some time. Oh, my God.
You can have that for free. Yeah. So, all government bonds are falling. UK government bonds have fallen a little bit harder, and that's because there's a very recent memory in bond traders and bond investors' minds about the Liz Truss moment when the bond market really ceased to function. And there are people jumping up and down now and saying this is a crisis of a similar scale. That's simply not true.
Gary, I wonder if in the glue factory, the problem is if you keep banging on about growth the way that this government does, you have to decide growth at what cost. Because, you say, okay, I want growth, but I don't want growth, which if it means getting back into the single market. Yes, I want growth, but I don't want growth if it means that, I'm going to have no regulation at all. I'm going to allow, Elon Musk and the likes to come into the UK. Yes, I want growth, but I don't want growth if AI is going to be, ditching jobs left, right, and centre. Is that the problem? We kind of want to have it both ways, and we can't.
I think that is part of the problem. I think in terms of the government's problem, do you feel there is a very clear message on growth? And was it the dominating message from the moment they walked in the door? No, because they were talking about previous governments' problems. The only new policy for which they were known was the winter fuel allowance for ages, and we waited as the dust whisked around for a budget, and that eventually comes at the end of October. That was a long time.
Too long, many would say.
Before there was a shape on what it was they wanted to do. And then there's another pause because we're waiting for lots of reviews about growth. And apparently Rachel Reeves is going to call in lots of regulators to tell them about they've got to come up with how they're going to contribute. I don't remember that being a sort of central part of Labour's message in the election, deregulation, but it is now because they're pulling on every lever they can find, and there is a slight whiff of desperation to it. But as you say, Europe is still the untouchable, it seems.
But I wonder if there's also a problem about how you measure success, right? So if you talk about growth, what does it actually mean to most people? And how do they feel? And then if you then go to specifics like NHS waiting lists, I mean, okay, it's great if they can say the waiting lists are down from 10 hours to 4 hours, but if I have to wait more than half an hour at A&E, I'm going to be very upset. Are they setting themselves impossible targets, metric targets?
The way Keir Starmer talks about it is he talks about people will just feel that something's got better, and it'll be the money in their pocket, the disposable income, the fact that they know anecdotally talking to people that they're getting into hospital a bit quicker, that something's getting better.
Pretty nebulous though, isn't it, the feeling?
Yeah, but he thinks that's as good as it gets, and that's where our politics is, that unless you feel that, you won't vote for him, and that's as good as it's going to get, because it won't be much more than that.
But they're not feeling it in the polls, are they, Luke?
No, they're certainly not feeling it, and there is a sense that it's not going to happen. The public are incredibly cynical. But I do think you hit on an important point when it comes to the metrics. And I think this is, whilst it wasn't delivered, I think this is something that Boris Johnson actually recognised in 2019, that you can have growth, but if it's just benefiting the City of London, you're going to do nothing to tackle causes of populism, discontent. So there's got to be how do you feel it in Blyth? How do you feel it in Merseyside? How do you feel it around the country? And I think perhaps by moving so quickly away from the Tories levelling up idea, not delivered though it was, they've lost something there in the sort of actual tangibility of people's day-to-day.
Katie, what's the one economic factor that if it was going in the right direction could make a big difference to how people feel? Is it interest rates, mortgage rates?
That would certainly help. I think it does go back to your point about this being sort of quite nebulous. People want to be able to get into A&E without sitting around for hours. You look at some of the reporting that the Liverpool Echo's been doing on the situation in hospitals there. It's pretty tough reading. But economically, the jobs market is pretty healthy. The economy is not in anywhere near the bad shape that it was. Inflation has come down a lot. And, as Luke was saying, pretty much all the elections last year, incumbents got carted out because voters hate inflation. And we've got inflation somewhat under control. So all the kind of ingredients are there, but certainly the city wants to hear a somewhat more positive message.
And so this leads me to my next question. If the ingredients are there, if you're at the government bake-off and you've got your flour and your sugar and your milk and and a few little pearls of chocolate, and you know what I'm talking about, Gary.
I'd like to see you doing that in a apron.
Are you telling me that I can't? We'll do a bake-off, right? Okay. I think there's some cookies anyway. But no, so you've got all the ingredients, and what binds them together is a political leader who comes along with a fabulous speech or sends the right messages. Now, I know the boosterism is very much out of fashion, and the government keeps telling us every day that they're not going to be boosterish. But I wonder if there's a secret sauce there that Keir Starmer is missing, where you want to raise the rhetorical level of what you're saying. Don't sound like a defense lawyer. Sound like someone who's actually making a case. And then maybe over time, people will either feel it or they won't feel it. But that's an important ingredient.
His political rhetoric, I sense, has shifted a little. For the first 4 months of this government, when business was getting a bit gloomy and everybody was wanting him to talk up the economy and sound a bit more boosterish, he didn't. And the advice to him was, don't do that. The voters will think you've lost your marbles. At the AI speech on Monday, when I asked him, you're not going to get productivity gains from AI in the public sector that quickly, it's going to take 10 years. I was actually quoting what Labour had said in opposition. He said, no, it won't be like that. We could get it really quickly. I think this is going to come a lot more quickly. I don't want to sound boosterish, but it's going to come very, very quickly.
There we go. And
I thought, are you reaching for that to help us, guide us, or are you reaching for that in desperation? Because it wasn't in the main body of the speech. It didn't pass that test, but he said it nonetheless in the Q&A.
Do you think they're missing a sort of big destination that would explain, some of the stuff that's going wrong? They'd say, okay, and I know they say the destination is growth. The destination might be, NHS waiting lists coming down, but something a little bit bigger that makes people understand. And really, this is the essential question of Britain today. What are we all about? What is global Britain all about? Luke, first.
I totally agree. I think lots of what they're doing at the moment, when we talk to people in focus groups, seems a bit random. They sort of say, well, he's spending all of his time abroad, and we never get a good deal out of that anyway. And he's gone after pensioners, farmers, and small businesses. But why? It all just looks very bitty to people. So I think you've got to explain in aid of what. And I totally agree on the boosterism. In fact, the best quote, which sticks with me now, it was a couple of months ago, was a guy who says, he keeps saying he doesn't want to be Mr. Popular, but why doesn't he just try? Why doesn't he try and be popular and start from there? And I think that would give people a sense that we're doing tough stuff, but it's for this. This is where we want to be in 2029.
Yeah, and that's why I felt like the AI announcement was kind of weird in the sense that, there's nothing in that speech that Rishi Sunak couldn't have written. It felt very Rishi to me, talking about AI and potholes. Yeah. And, I don't
What is it about potholes, by the way? Everyone's got to bring up sodding potholes, I
do not know. But, I don't have a dog in this fight. I don't have a strong view that AI is a bad thing. I think it's probably a good thing. There probably are some efficiencies here. But is that really what the average voter wants to hear about? I think they'd rather hear about, energy projects and network projects and transport projects and stuff that actually gets staff into hospitals where we need them to be. So, I'm not a political wonk by any stretch of the imagination, but that sounds like the direction that voters and the city are all kind of looking for.
So it's a sort of combination of specific stuff, but not too much in case people actually measure reality against your plan and the timetable, and then some big idea, right? So what's the big idea? What is the big idea he actually has, but he's not telling us? Or isn't there one?
There isn't one.
There isn't one.
There isn't one. There is no clear shape to Starmerism. It's migrated in front of our eyes all the way over from where he was with Jeremy Corbyn to where he's ended up. There isn't a shape to it. It's why he can't actually really in any sort of in any term, medium term, short term that I can envisage, get rid of Rachel Reeves, because what are you replacing her with? What's the new policy? They say, put Pat McFadden there.
That's going to really stop people in their tracks.
Rachel Reeves was without the joie de vivre. It doesn't get you anywhere. It's the same. It's the same policy.
What about West Streeting?
Well, that might get you somewhere, but Keir would have to have signed up to what we think is West Streeting's core set of beliefs, which have an awfully strong resemblance to Tony Blair's third term public sector reforms and choice and involving the private sector. And when Keir Starmer's standing next to Wes Streeting, he supports what he's doing. But when he's standing next to Bridget Phillipson, he supports a rather different image of public sector running and reform that, without ever adjudicating between the two, because I don't think he came into politics. I think he came into politics to become Attorney General, and he's a sort of accidental leader of the Labour Party, Prime Minister, who never really had a very, very strong shape to his politics.
Yeah, he's got that in common with Donald Trump, who probably never thought he was going to get to the top job back in 2016 and then did, Although slightly different personality. Personality slightly different. Yeah. I want to ask you something, Luke. I mean, I find it amazing that the Labour Party in 2024, despite its historic victory, got fewer actual votes than Jeremy Corbyn's Labour Party did in 2019. That is true, right?
Yeah.
Okay. But they've got a massive majority. Is the problem here that they've got a lot of power in the House of Commons, but just not much popularity on the street outside?
Yeah.
And that's a dysfunction that that either works in your favour or it doesn't.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when we talk about the drop in their support, it was from quite a low base. Getting that landslide majority in Parliament on such a low share of the vote is unprecedented. But it also means that they've got this really strange coalition where you've got Labour MPs from, Blythe, Darlington, but you've also got them in Aldershot, in Buckinghamshire and places like that. It's really hard to keep that coalition together. So it's a broad coalition, but it's really shallow. And I think that's going to be a struggle throughout the term.
If you were guessing now, knowing the polls, which of those set of Labour MPs are most at risk? Is it the ones in what we used to call the red wall, with Reform breathing down their neck?
It is, absolutely, because Reform are in second place in almost 100 Labour seats. Not just the red wall seats that they lost in 2019, but also cabinet ministers, people like Yvette Cooper, Ed Miliband, all at risk, because that's the area where Reform are making gains.
So does Reform have an economic plan that makes sense as far as you know?
If it does, I haven't had it articulated directly to me. But one big thing to bear in mind here, we were talking about, is some sort of reshuffle necessary? Does Rachel Reeves need to move? There's a lot of very clever analytical stuff that goes into what is this bond worth and where should sterling be traded. But a big part of it, honestly, is just vibes. And the image of Rachel Reeves either being ousted or voluntarily going would be precisely the wrong thing for UK markets at the moment. So I think there's just some sort of mischief making going on.
What do the markets make of Nigel Farage's souffle-like rise in the opinion polls?
Honestly, I haven't heard investors bringing it up because ultimately we've got 4 or 5 years before we need to worry about this again. And so I think, the investors are kind of working on the basis that this is a done deal and this is going to, carry on for the foreseeable future for their portfolios, which is exactly
however
what they
boring
want.
it is, they've got continuity.
They like boring. Yeah. Boring is good.
If you said the words to them, Nigel Farage, Prime Minister, will they blanch? I mean, would they pile out of the island?
It depends on their personal politics. Some people that I speak to in the city would be perfectly cool with that. Some of them would not.
How much of a threat is Reform, given the fact that we've got 4.5 years before the next general election? Gary?
Well, as Luke was saying, they're in second place in nearly 100 seats. But that means you'd think their maximum growth in a very, very good year for them, a good general election year, would be a number in the low 100s, because they might just, have an extraordinary rise and get some other ones where they're in third place. Some of them are in quite close third place around the country. So you don't make it to number 10 on those numbers. But I tell you, the conversation that absolutely dominates around Westminster, you sit down with any MPs and they start talking about whether the right can do a anti-left tactical voting scheme at the next election phenomenon to match what happened in the other direction at the last election. And it is one of the hottest topics, and Labour people talk about it as much as Tories. And it opens up enormous issues about, is Kemi Badenoch the right leader to do that? Can anybody would Nigel Farage play second fiddle to anybody? Does he not think the world's at his feet now? Would he really want to play and help a legacy party like the Conservative Party when he's the new guy on the block? It opens up a huge number of questions, but boy, are people talking about it.
And given the fact, Luke, that voters are shopping around, they're fairly fickle and they like to kind of change their mind. Is it possible that the Tory party sees this as they've done before and say, let's get rid of Kemi Badenoch and put someone else in? Is it possible that the Labour Party will do what they don't normally do, which is to get rid of the Prime Minister, take a leaf out of the Tories' book?
I think the problem with that is that the Tories have almost exhausted that playbook to some degree.
Putting it mildly there.
Yeah, but the sort of people are saying, another one? I mean, it just genuinely would be their reaction to get rid of them. Because you've got to remember, it's not just that people are miserable about public services not working. They also just think our politics is exhausting and has been since 2016. And I think the idea of getting rid of Keir Starmer, at least for the foreseeable future, would play into that sense of, God, Labour are just as bad as the Tories. They can't run the show. So I'm not sure that would work. I also don't think it would play in the Tories' favour with Badenoch as well, because again, it would reinforce that these guys just love the knifing rather than the governing.
We're going to end on Tulip Siddiq. Gary, Tulip Siddiq, and I don't look so surprised. I mean, that was the big story yesterday. I mean, is this a lack of judgment from the Prime Minister that she was allowed to stay there for that long? I mean, we knew about her problems back in the summer, if not before.
Was it a lack of judgment to appoint her in the first place, given her connections to a family which only fell from power in August last year, it's true, after the election, but which had a pretty grotty reputation for despotism.
Oh, terrible. I mean, and fell under very dramatic, brutal circumstances.
And she wasn't a distant family relation. So I think the question of judgment goes back a bit further. Labour say absolutely not. And you can't visit the crimes of relations on the minister. But yeah, I think it does put a giant question there. And then the fact that he says, knowing what we all now know, he says the door's still open. It shows a bit of a blind spot.
Final one to you, Luke, very briefly. I mean, Taylor Swift tickets, Arsenal tickets, Lou Haig having to resign. Now she's had to go. I mean, has that formed an opinion amongst the people you poll?
It has. I mean, I don't think actually the ministerial resignations do that much other than a sense.
But Taylor Swift did.
But freebies did, because it really got into that sense of, are these people really in it for the right reasons? Are they doing it for the right thing? And also they promised they were going to be so much better than the last lot who they prosecuted on this. So it's the hypocrisy which I think has stuck with people as much as the act.
And of course, Tulip Siddiq would say, I mean, she denies any wrongdoing. We have to mention that. That's certainly true. But you do wonder whether their political antennae have been sort of cut off at the end.
There's something also about certain types of politicians, and I think Keir Starmer falls into this bracket. He has a very strong idea of his own moral uprightness. You had it with Gordon Brown as well. I can do no wrong.
Yeah.
And he would find it very hard for anybody. He thinks he's that. Some part of him, I think, believes that gives him a bit more range, or certainly that he's not challenging himself, because he feels very comfortable that he has a strong moral compass. And I think he was baffled as this stuff came to hit him. But as you say, everything we hear in focus groups, polls, the freebies thing is still out there.
Still out there, and it won't go away. It's one of those things that people can get their head around. I've got to get my head around the time, which is that we've run out of it. So thank you very much, Katie Martin, Luke Trill, Gary Gibbon. Thanks to all of you. That is the Political Forecast. See you next time. Goodbye.